Okay, we are recording. All right, welcome everyone to session 2 in our Cultivating Community Leadership and Power within Ecosystems for Safety series. My name is Ashley Klein-Jimenez, and I am with Prevent Connect and Valor. Prevent Connect is a national project of Valor US, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information presented in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or oh my goodness, I have to put $1 in the jar, in the CalCasa jar, or Valor. Haven't said CalCasa in a really long time. All right, so you all are familiar with Prevent Connect. We're here because we are interested in preventing violence before it's ever started. And not just sexual violence, but really looking at intimate partner violence and all related and connected forms of violence across the lifespan. And doing that, we have to connect to one another. We have to look at the roots of violence. We have to look at the way oppression shapes systems and environments that allow violence to exist. And so that is what we are here to talk about today. And I am so happy to introduce you all to the Prevention Institute team and hand it over. So Will and Zach, I don't think Lisa's with us today, but we're always in spirit, but I'll hand it over to the both of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. Hey, everyone. My name is Will Crary. Use he, him pronouns. I'm an associate program manager with Prevention Institute. And I guess just a little bit about myself. My background is in social work and education. I'm really excited to bring some of those ideas into this conversation about what Ashley was just describing, power and how oppression plays into the ecosystems where we try to create thriving partnerships and strategies for safer communities. And so I do that at the intersection of mental health and violence prevention. And I am joined by my colleague, Zach. Zach, if you want to say hey.
Everyone, Zach Taro, also with Prevention Institute. I'm a program coordinator, and I work a lot with Will and Lisa on this slide here, who isn't able to join us today, but was really integral in putting together a lot of the content for this presentation. And I support across kind of our safety and well-being portfolio of projects. So happy to be here, and thanks for joining us.
Awesome. And as you can see behind me, we are with Prevention Institute. This is our Oakland office, which Zach and I both work out of. We're a national nonprofit, and our mission is to build in prevention, health equity, and racial justice into key policies and actions at the federal, state, local, and organizational levels. And what that looks like is thinking about the places where people live, play, pray, learn, and how they can foster safety and well-being. And so we're going to be reflecting more and more in this coming year based on this conversation on ecosystems, and want to have that conversation with you all as well. And the way we're going to do that, these are actually the same objectives as our first session, but we're going to put more emphasis onto the skill building because we have our CDC grantees and partners here. We want to think about how are these ideas going to be translated into actionable steps that we all can take. So I want to learn from one another. And we're going to do that, as Ashley said, in breakout groups too. So as we move through these objectives, we want you all to bring your expertise to the table. And we'll just start, as Ashley said, with a quick recap. And I'll be honest, it's about a 15-minute recap, and we're going to try to move quickly and sprinkle in some questions, but we really do want to set a foundation before we pass it over to our guest presenters from the California Department of Public Health. Then we'll have a Q&A with them to learn a little bit more about their work before moving into our skill building breakout discussion. So as a little warm up, we thought we could revisit a slide that we looked at together in the first session. And knowing that some of you didn't get to participate, I want to just share that we're talking about ecosystem approach to partnerships and power building. And so we discussed what are the challenges to equitable partnerships posed by our current systems, current cultures, current just ways of doing work. And one of the ways we identified challenges here are the silos that we work in. And so it's sort of a playful, silly image, but also I think what we see here are these people taking heroic efforts, moving from one silo to the next, trying to make connections across the different works that we do that can be focused on our own agendas, our own outcomes, our own needs. And so I wanted to just encourage everyone to get their fingers moving, get their ideas moving, and share a bit about any experiences you have navigating silos. And so that could mean recent successes or challenges working across organizations, maybe the pros and cons of bridging initiatives, any tips or questions you have about weaving partnerships, or just reactions to this image. And so we'll give you about a minute to share some thoughts in the chat, and then we'll see kind of what's coming up for folks before we move on. So I'll give you about 60 seconds to respond here. Right. Well, I think we can keep moving. I dropped something that's a little bit jokey in there, but I just said that sometimes I get to another silo and no one's home, and that happens. And I'm seeing some other stuff coming up here. People getting bogged down in their own work. The image is just kind of like really depicting the balancing act of partnerships. It's hard, but worthwhile. Let's see. So thank you for sharing. Oh yeah, they're really coming in now. So encouraging folks to check those out as we continue. And these are ideas we can bring into our breakout groups as well. So let's start with our framing, and bear with me for about 15 minutes here. Just want to share some key concepts that set the stage for our first guest speaker in last week's session that will also support us in understanding the work of our partners in the California Department of Public Health. And so encouraging folks, again, bringing your experiences and expertise or resources into the chat as we're moving through this, and we can just bring them into the discussion as we move forward. So last time we started off with this quote from author Adrienne Marie Brown, and we are just really in love with this quote because we think it illustrates the power of an ecosystem perspective to the equity and justice work that we do. So I'm just going to quickly read it for folks. In nature, we see so clearly how the healthiest ecosystems thrive in biodiversity. There are as many ways of being, growing, processing sunlight and rain into life as there are species. No creature, plant in that healthy ecosystem functions as a monopoly or as an individual. They make it as long and as far as they can grow together. And so that really turns out that we're not the only ones excited by this quote. And as we'll show on this next slide, there's actually a lot of people thinking about this ecosystem concept. And we're hoping that you are too, which is why you came here. But we just wanted to point out that the term is being used in different fields, different audiences, different circumstances and outcomes, whether it's social change, power building, partnerships. And I have to admit, I had a little bit of pause seeing it coming up everywhere. I'm like, well, it's a little bit tempting to write this off as a fad, maybe. But we genuinely think that there's like meaningful integration of lessons and guidance that comes directly from leaders in the health equity and racial justice initiatives for taking on this perspective. And so we know that an ecosystem approach really is rooted in a social ecological model, which undergirds so much of what the CDC guidance is for project development across preventing multiple forms of violence like sexual and domestic violence. And so you're likely familiar with this from technical packages, different training sessions you've attended or led grant reports that you submit, and elsewhere. And so when we talk about the features of an ecosystem, what we're thinking about is the focus on social and community determinants of health. And so this is the past, present, and future contributions to equitable outcomes in our surrounding environment. So at each level of that social ecological model. And for us, an ecosystem approach really encourages us to think about the purpose as well as the different levels of the model and how we can meet the different needs at different levels. And so we draw lessons from individual and relational strategies that support a groundswell of systems change thinking and systems level strategies. And we also just want to note one of the key important features is addressing power dynamics. And we know that navigating power imbalances is an invaluable skill set, yet we need to also not just navigate, but address how power can unjustly tip scales in our partnerships, in the way we deliver services, in the way we perform advocacy. And so power is going to be a major theme of our conversation today, because so many of our best teachers in the work for shifting to an ecosystem approach are really coming from the power building field. And so we have a quote, we talked about this last time a little bit. It comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation initiative called Lead Local. And it's a collaborative effort that brought together well-respected power leaders as well as movement leaders, examining the relationship between power building and community health. And so the quote says, community power building organizations work within an ecosystem of other community organizing groups and actors who offer a range of assets, including research, advocacy, policy, and legal support to build power along multiple sectors and use diverse methods. For the ecosystem to be effective, experiences show that building and organizing a base of, or constituency is the heart of the work and therefore must be at the center. And so what we love about this is that it's saying that understanding power is not enough, and we need to activate power, and we need to align our partners' resources to get at the root causes of inequities and existence of violence in our communities. And so again, I want to just acknowledge I'm moving very quickly because I think the heart of this work will come through when we get to share the microphone with our guest speakers from California Department of Public Health. So if I am moving quickly, please drop any questions you may have in the chat. And also, Ashley shared the slides earlier, so you can check those out as well. What we have on the screen right now are the 6 elements of a power ecosystem framework. So up until this point, I've been talking about an ecosystem, and now we're sort of transitioning our language to a power ecosystem. And these 6 elements come from the California California Endowment. Hey there, Enrique, see you smiling, not CDPH, from California Endowment and USC's Equity Research Institute. And so these 6 elements are here to support us understand how a power ecosystem operates and how to work effectively within it. And so we're going to talk about how each of us have community and grassroots organizing groups that we may have relationships with, or that we can devote more time and resources to understanding how our work is aligned. The shared values and analysis is the heart of collective action, whereas the relationships is the connective tissue, whether it's formal or informal relationships between individuals, the organizational social ties. These are all major parts that help us understand the value of partnerships in advancing upstream solutions within our ecosystems. And then the infrastructure is sort of like Prevent Connect, right? Prevent Connect is a forum for idea sharing, and there are different forms of infrastructure or structures in place that facilitate sharing ideas, sharing resources, collaborating. Composition encourages us to think about who's at the table, who created the table, why do we have a table in the first place, Who are we serving? How are we prioritizing responsiveness, representation, a sense of belonging and inclusion? And then lastly are the capacities. And so we're going to try to devote some time today thinking about the skills, knowledge, and resources needed within our ecosystem. And if we don't have those skills or knowledge, then who are we partnering with to ensure that power building and prioritizing the needs and assets of the communities we work with are at the center? And so that is really graphically represented here in what we call the power flower. We're borrowing this from our friends again at California Endowment and USC, where what we're seeing is a representation of the vital actors within the power ecosystem. And it all builds around a core of organizing and base building. And so I want us to take a few moments and maybe in the chat, you can share based on what you're seeing here, and it might just be your kind of gut reaction. Where do you see your work and your skill set? And then who are your partners traditionally or aspirationally within this power flower? And so let us know if you have questions, but kind of think about which of these petals or even maybe at the center best represents the work you're currently doing. Right. I'm seeing someone saying coalitions, alliances, advocacy, and policy. So already identifying ourselves in more than one petal, maybe. So that's really helpful too, knowing that there's different skill sets within your organization. Advocacy, alliance, change. All right. So feel free to keep dropping ideas in the chat there. So our last slide that I want to share before I just give you a brief understanding of what the previous session's guest speaker talked about is this, the steps to doing a power analysis. And as we saw in the power flower, at the center of our work needs to be power building, base building organizations, understanding how they are mobilizing people in the community. And in order to be in right relationship with those types of entities, we need to understand where power exists in our ecosystems and even how our organizations use and yield power. And so there are a lot of great resources on the steps you take to conduct a power analysis or to draw out a power map. And so this is just one that we really like. Because it's a quick recap, we won't go through each of the steps, but I think talking through the work of our last guest speaker really illustrates the importance of always having a power lens in the work that we do. And so this is Dr. Iona Harrison, and she's just like a shining star when it comes to thinking about how to be in relationship with community leadership to support advancing the safety work of Urban Institute. And so she shared with us a little bit about the Promoting Adolescent Sexual Health and Safety Project. And one of the key reasons that we were just really excited to bring her to the Prevent Connect learning community is that she is using and really devoted to a power lens as a researcher in her community and all that she does. And so briefly, the PASS program is a community-based teen sexual health and safety program in the Washington, D.C. area. And they're engaging teenage Black youth living in or near public housing. And they're facilitating conversations with local leaders, trusted resident facilitators from the participants' neighborhood. And the curriculum that they're using is co-created with the communities that they piloted the project in. And so when Dr. Harrison was helping the co-creation of the evaluation of the program, as well as the design of the curriculum, she was always revisiting questions that helped her explore power dynamics. Questions like, what's the motivation for seeking community partnerships? And is there a benefit to community members? Why would community members want to be involved in this? And how can we uplift their voices within this work? And then lastly, she was always taking into consideration how are decisions being made, whether it's about resources, whether it's about priorities, and how are community leaders involved in those decisions. So the key lessons that she shared were really about the interplay of community leadership, community partnerships, and these power dynamics. And she helped us understand that the success of her work really rests on flexibility, responsiveness, and a through line of accountability. And so we were just really grateful to hear from Urban Institute, and we're excited in a few minutes here to hear from our friends at California Department of Public Health as well. So I know that was super, super quick. I'm curious, for those of you who participated last week and those of you who are seeing this content for the first time, what stood out to you? And what are you curious to learn more about? And so take a moment to respond here. And we want to just keep the responses coming because they'll really help us inform where we take this discussion, especially for the breakout discussions that'll happen towards the end of our time together. So we can wait a couple moments here for some more responses about what's standing out and what you're curious to learn more about. Rebecca is writing, wanting to maybe learn more about power building and accountability. That's great. We're going to be hearing about mobilizing leadership in communities in a few moments here. So I think that fits right in. Concrete examples. Excellent. So that is coming right up as well. And that request for concrete examples is perfect for this learning community, right? Because we know that each of you may not be using this language. A lot of the times at Prevention Institute, we're thinking about how do we name these things that are happening that don't necessarily have best practices yet, aren't evidence-based yet. And so having concrete examples will often come from all of you who are participating, who are doing some of this work already. Kathleen shares the power building dynamics and my role in moving the work forward. Okay, cool. Definitely want to support folks see how they can engage in this work. And so before we pass it to our guest speakers, I'm just going to actually hand over the mic to my colleague, Zach, to help you all think about or understand how Prevention Institute is taking concrete steps and how we're putting these ideas into action.
Sure. Thanks, Will. So yeah, we just wanted to kind of close out our recap and content before introducing our guests with that focus on the skill building and actionability of some of these things that we're talking about. So we just wanted to share a little bit more to think about how ways to support us consider how to take action within our power ecosystems. So what we're about to share is by no means exhaustive, but it can be a good place to start dialogue with agencies, partners, and various community members. So on this slide, you'll kind of see an introduction to the notion of something called choice points. And we've adapted some of this content from the amazing folks at Race Forward. So this choice points tool has really supported us at Prevention Institute on our racial justice journey and is also useful for identifying ways to both address and disrupt power imbalances. So we wanted to share a little bit more about our experience in using choice points because we think it can bring some of these concepts to life. So as you see on the slide, choice points are kind of defined most simply as decision-making opportunities that can influence outcomes. And so the cumulative impacts of a lot of these smaller choice points can be just as significant as the impact of one bigger, more daunting decision. So at Prevention Institute, we've made a conscious decision to use a racial justice framing in our work as opposed to just racial equity. And while much of the public health discourse uses racial equity, we view racial justice as a action-oriented approach. And at Prevention Institute, we've used this concept of choice points to support our strategic communications work, mostly in our violence prevention portfolio, given the historically racialized narratives on violence. And employing this choice point notion helps support us in devoting time, energy, and resources to elevating the voices and perspectives of Black-led organizations, leaders, activists, and especially younger people through things like co-writing op-eds and helping to get them placed in outlets, including the Trace, the Hill, and the San Diego Tribune. And then we also took a strategic communications stance to kind of advocate for public agency partners to move away from perpetuating racialized stereotypes of violence when publishing content, which has really impacted the visuals used in reports, countywide health department reports. And the choice point for us in that work was thinking about what photos to include. And with choice points in mind, we recognize the importance of using these small moments as critical points, because what we may feel like are small decisions in the beginning begin to kind of embed into organizational culture and policy. So to that note of kind of starting with those smaller choice points, we wanted to share a little bit more of a concept of these multiple pound weights. And this kind of came from one of our racial justice teachers and author Rinku Sen, who we've had a staff retreat with before to talk about racial justice and how to embed that in our organization's journey. And she shared the metaphor for prioritizing actions and building capacity over time, and really prioritizing starting with those smaller decisions, like, for example, what images to be used in a report on gun violence. And then with more experience and strengthening of those muscles, beginning to pick up those larger weights, thinking about who we partner with, how we prioritize lived experience as expertise for determining policy advocacy priorities. So thinking about some steps to consider when employing this choice point notion, these ones on the slide here can be helpful when thinking about how to use choice points in your work. Keeping the racial and gender justice framing may be helpful, but power dynamics more broadly can also be applied. So starting with identifying a key decision or course of action, this could be related to contracts, maybe hiring or hosting community events. Once you've identified that key decision or course of action, you can create a list of potential directions and the outcomes that those directions could lead to that may be more than just the current status quo or the most popular choice. Then you can begin taking steps in the direction of the new choice and think about ways to build in routines to live into those values that you're moving towards. Choice points can also be used in the context of our discussion to think about ways to build more just partnerships and move power more justly within your ecosystem. So far we've talked about how power exists in our partnerships and relationships to community. And with the choice points tool, we're wanting to put those values into action. And we're going to hear from our guest speakers in just a moment, and they're going to be discussing some of the choice points that they've had in recent work, including how to move more power to community members. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest speakers for today, Enrica Bertoldo, Elena Costa, and Mina White, all with the California Department of Public Health Injury and Violence Prevention Branch. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to them to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their work.
Hi, my name is Mina White. I think I'm up first. If you could go to the next slide, please. So Enrica and Elena and I are here today to give you some examples of how we're addressing this power ecosystem framework within our work at the California Department of Public Health. I am specifically with the Rape Prevention and Education Program, a CDC-funded program to prevent sexual violence here at CDPH. If you can move on to the next slide, I can talk to you a little bit more about our violence prevention programs here and just give you a little bit more context about what we're doing here in our Injury and Violence Prevention branch. We're a huge department, obviously. We're the California Department of Public Health, the state health department. But we're housed within a branch that works on preventing both unintentional injuries and also intentional injuries, also known as violence prevention. So the role of CDPH and the Injury and Violence Prevention Branch is to apply the public health approach to violence prevention. I know some of you here on the call are from health departments, some of you aren't. So just give you, in a nutshell, we use the public health approach and promote primary prevention, ending violence before it happens, and population-based strategies. We promote community-based approaches that address social norms, try to use an evidence-based prevention approach based on data, research, best practices. So here on this slide are some of the violence prevention programs administered by our branch. Many of them are CDC programs, and those of you on this webinar are familiar with those. We do have some state funding for some of these programs as well. And Enrica and Lena will be talking about some of their work within these programs later on. Next slide, please. So I want to talk to you about some of our priorities that we've identified within our violence prevention here in our branch. We did some strategic planning during the last couple of years across our violence prevention programs, and we identified 5 priority protective strategies. So this strategic planning was based on the CDC's violence prevention technical packages for child maltreatment, intimate partner violence, sexual violence. We also looked at just the best available research there is out there in these topic areas, and we tried to identify those shared risk protective factors that are that run across all of the areas that we work on in our branch. So these really stemmed from wanting to address these shared risk protective factors, and as Will mentioned earlier, really wanting to de-silo our programs, which I know is easier said than done. So as he recapped earlier, it's really difficult to incorporate community into our work because it is so hard when we work within our silos, which are really defined by these topic areas that we're funded to work within. So by identifying these areas of economic security and mobility, protective environments, community leadership and engagement, child and youth development, leadership for women, girls, and gender expansive people, we tried to identify strengths-based prevention strategies that we could use to address multiple forms of violence. Next slide. And I won't go into this too much. I know we'll already shared this, but just to give you the sort of basis of, we're going to be talking about how our work fits within these 6 elements. Next slide. So as part of a state government department, you know, like I already said, this can be really difficult to do, but we really strive to cultivate this public health ecosystem where we're power sharing, equitable partnerships, and community wisdom are really central pillars of the work that we do. And we try to do this by supporting and funding community organizing work to support community-led prevention. And Rita will be talking a little bit more about this later on. We also want to prioritize building infrastructure and relationships, building capacity within communities through strategic coalition building, leadership development, which we really see as critical components of power building and sustaining these equitable partnerships. We also strive to promote and educate on best practices that involve communities. We provide technical assistance and training to build capacity of both the staff within our state workforce that work within these communities and within the communities themselves. So one of the end goals is really for our local partners act as leaders within the field, not just as a recipient of funding. One way we also strive to address this power ecosystem framework is to analyze, disseminate data, and really incorporate community voice to inform decisions. So not just base our programs on the hard data, but the community, but to really incorporate that community level data into our decision-making and programs. So we'll be going into more detail about how we do this during our conversation today. And with that, we can go to the next slide, and I think Enrico will be up next.
Great. Thanks so much, Mina. Hi, everyone. I'm Enrica Bertoldo, she, her. I also work with Mina and Elena at the California Department of Public Health, and I'm the coordinator for our rape prevention and education program. Pleasure to be here with you to talk about some of our projects that we've been doing. So Elena and I are going to give some examples of community leadership at the local level and how we promote it. It's done through our different programs and our funding sources. And then after this, we'll share a little bit of examples that we do at the state level. So our examples that we'd like to highlight today are our environmental scan findings for leadership for women and girls. That's a report I'm going to talk a little bit about. I'm going to talk about our community mobilization projects, and then Elena will speak to the All Children Thrive coalitions and reimagining child well-being. Next slide, please. Okay, so first I'm going to start with some interesting findings from our environmental scan that we conducted back in 2021. This report was funded by the RPE program, and it really was a very initial exploration of leadership and economic supports as violence prevention strategies for girls and women. We just wanted to document the landscape of what was happening, what were the priorities and needs. So we did that by conducting some key informant interviews with different types of partners, listening sessions with girls, and also an organizational survey. And this is an example also of how we as a state gather some information, and that also helps inform not only our state action plan, but programming at the local level. Next slide, please. Okay, so the report itself documents challenges in the context of gender equity and economic supports and leadership. Quite honestly, there were so many challenges that were noted. You can go to the full report for that, but I'm only going to highlight a couple that are related to leadership. And the first is around sexism, racism, transphobia, and leadership. Many biases were described for girls and women in leadership roles, particularly for women of color and trans women. Many interviewees noted how these biases not only prevent girls and women from getting into leadership positions, but once they're there, it's the existing power structures that limit their ability to make any type of changes within their organization or system. So we do see that power structures are serving as barriers to diversity and leadership roles. Another challenge that was highlighted was the one-time leadership investments. We heard that there's lots of leadership opportunities that are out there, but they really lack the ongoing support that's needed. You know, they start and they stop, and there really is a desire and a need to have more longer-term investments that create more of this pipeline of opportunity for girls and women. And so building, more effective leadership strategies in the long run could be closely related to how we might think about building power in an ecosystem. Okay, next slide, please. So some suggestions emerged around leadership strategies. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list by any means. The first is around recruitment, that if we want to think about hiring successfully within marginalized communities, organizations need to think about revising their practices and removing barriers like not having a 4-year degree for all jobs, and then also really lifting up and valuing non-traditional lived experiences. Another strategy was around tiered leadership development. And a tiered model is basically promoting continuous growth for staff. It's giving them increasing levels of leadership and professional development. And this would also include regular coaching. Another strategy that was highlighted is the need to embed more healing and addressing trauma within organizational practices for staff. Another strategy was around participatory approaches to leadership. This is really involving program participants who are actively shaping the program. And this is really building their skills as leaders and, their trusted messengers in their communities. And they're also having the respect of institutional partners to participate in decision making. Next slide, please. So the report also looked at the types of collaborations that are out there around these issues. And we found that there's a tendency to partner with similar organizations. So for example, community-based organizations that are serving the same target population. The report also highlighted some strong examples of multi-sector collaboration and how important it is, to bridge sectors and issue areas, especially around the challenges that were identified. So it's really important to break down this tendency to partner with similar organizations. One consideration that came out of that was that coalitions sometimes might need to think about building their own collective power within their sector first, due to power imbalances that exist when working across other sectors. So for us, this means that we need to be more mindful and paying attention to the power dynamics as we explore more partnerships in this area. Okay, I think the next slide. All right, I'm going to talk about our community mobilization projects. Really love talking about this project. We've invested in this strategy for well over 12 years. We've been funding local grants through our RPE and domestic violence programs. And the reason is because we really value community leadership. We believe community members are experts of their own communities, and they can act together to drive the solutions that they'd like to see. So we've been using the close to home approach, where youth and adult organizing teams, they develop the campaigns, the actions, the policies that they like to see happen across the 4 phases of the close to home approach, which is pictured here. And really the beauty of the model is that it really allows for a lot of creativity, flexibility among a network of people and partners, to come together, to act together. It's really a form of power building. And we have seen success with this approach through the local grants that we fund, when organizations really do allow that power sharing with community members. Otherwise, it's just not an organizational fit. If the organization wants to drive the work as opposed to allowing community members to do so, then that's a consideration for using this approach. Okay, next slide, please. All right, here's a wonderful example for one of our local grants, Alliance for Community Transformations. They mobilize a very small rural Latino community through this community beautification project. Through a community assessment, they learned that their community members wanted less graffiti, make it more pretty, as they said. And they also learned that there was this distrust between the local first responders and the Latino people. So the adult and the youth leaders, they took action to change the physical environment, and they claimed this block in the neighborhood by painting a mural on a fence line. And they did this by engaging all these different partners, including those first responders, like the fire department, the California Highway Patrol, businesses like Home Depot, and other agencies like behavioral health care. And they were really able to create community connectedness. This happened during COVID, the beginning of COVID, through artistic expression. So in essence, this approach is wonderful for growing the skills of adult and youth community members for their own leadership, and also for them to develop ways for new partnerships. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elena, who's going to talk more about her work.
Thanks, Enrica. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here with you. My name is Elena Costa. She, her pronouns, and I work with Enrica and Mina at the California Department of Public Health and the Injury and Violence Prevention Branch, and I support our childhood adversity prevention projects, in particular, the Essentials for Childhood Initiative, which is funded by the CDC. And then also a primary project is this this piece, which I'm about to describe to you, which is the All Children Thrive California initiative. There are some definite similarities between the close to home projects that Enrica shared about and the All Children Thrive initiative. The framework element that is complementary to the Prevention Institute's elements is community and grassroots organizing. This project is a 5-year initiative that's funded by State General Fund for $25 million. And their work intends to build up networks of people and places across the state that are working together to identify solutions that transform systems and shape child well-being. They bring together residents, elected officials, youth, and community leaders who know their jurisdictions the best to co-design solutions that work to prevent adversity in the community. And the big focus of their work is about healing the effects of adversities for California's children and transforming the future. So currently, right now, there are about 17 projects underway across the state. Basically, they have formed coalitions that are including community members, elected officials, and community gatekeepers to identify policy systems, environmental change policies that would improve the lives of children. Right now, they are just beginning some initial efforts also to break down silos by working with some initial efforts that are underway across the state with child welfare through their county prevention planning team. So we're really excited about the new opportunities that are going to flourish through that work. We know that about 52 of 58 counties have just begun developing their prevention plans, and we're looking right now at synergy between the All Children Thrive initiative and those county prevention planning teams who are child welfare. Additionally, our projects through the All Children Thrive initiative are utilizing strategies from the CDC's violence prevention technical packages rather broadly. So those are capturing not only the strategies that are listed for child maltreatment, but also domestic violence and youth violence, et cetera. So we're really excited about that. And then we, as the state, support the project with technical assistance and tools and oversight, but also that's how the staff of the ACT team function for all of their funded projects. They are providing intensive TA to those folks as well. Next slide. So the goals of the All Children Thrive initiative is really to shift power to the community. Like I mentioned, they're working very hard to think through how they can support long-term efforts to create and sustain policy change that improves the lives of children and families. And they're doing this through 4 main ways. The first is that they are providing financial and technical assistance resources to support ACT-funded projects. And they're working very similar to the 6 elements of the power ecosystems that were described before through something called an interdependent community condition. And the first of which is the mental model. So they're working to change habits of thought or deeply held beliefs and assumptions that are taken for granted about the ways that we operate and how we think and what we do and how we talk. They're also considering where opportunities exist in communities to shape relationships and connections, particularly the quality of connections or the communication occurring between people in the community, especially those with differing histories and viewpoints. They're also thinking about and being intentional around power dynamics. And so they're looking at the distribution of decision-making power, authority, and formal and informal influence among individuals and organizations. They're examining practices that are created by institutions, coalitions, and networks and other entities in the community that could serve to improve social and environmental progress. And oftentimes that looks like making adjustments to procedures or guidelines or even local ordinances. They're looking at policies. Oops, sorry, I have a little friend here. In the form around government and institutions and organizational rules and regulations. And of course, very importantly, how resources flow in a community, such as money, people, knowledge, information, and other assets of infrastructure, and how they're allotted and distributed. They also have a goal to educate and raise awareness among partners and decision makers in communities about policy systems, environmental change strategies, and also engaging and facilitating, very important, an equity advisory group that guides all the implementation of their activities. So, of course, they're looking to shape perspectives, and they want to be innovative through collaboration and shift power and achieve ultimately sustainable change when, when or if funding is no longer available, so that folks can continue this important work. Next slide. So another element, framework element of community and grassroots organizing is this piece called Reimagining Child Wellbeing, Local Policy Strategies to Prevent and Reduce ACEs or Adverse Childhood Experiences in California Communities. This is a resource that was developed by the California Department of Public Health, Injury and Violence Prevention Branch, the California Department of Social Services, Office of Child Abuse Prevention, the Essentials for Childhood Initiative, and the All Children Thrive California Project. And it was developed for ACT-funded projects or local coalitions and ACE and child maltreatment prevention advocates, and all of you actually as well, who are working to support communities as they educate about the need to adopt and implement evidence-based and evidence-informed strategies that improve the lives of children and families. It was developed through a rather extensive literature review and stakeholder engagement process. It offers a policy strategy menus for communities to consider when they're trying to determine strategies that they can use and identify that counter the conditions that lead to violence, particularly childhood adversity. It describes data related to those strategies so that folks can determine what's best for the community. And that they're looking for, it's a way to look at supportive tools for educating their decision makers and centering on the needs of communities who are experiencing systemic oppression and exclusion. And so there's a whole menu provided for you here, and that might also be of interest to look at further offline. And just big thanks to Will for putting a link to chat to that piece. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mina.
All right, there, you can go to the next slide too. And so I'll just really quickly talk about how we're going to shift gears a little bit here again, just because we want to talk about how we in our branch address another element of the framework, and that is by addressing infrastructure and relationships. And this slide lists some of the ways we do that by addressing the idea of power sharing at the state level. So not really tied to a specific a program or funding, but just really how we center community leadership and partnerships with these other organizations that we work with in an effort to address the power inequities between government organizations and nonprofits. So Elena and Enrica and I will talk more in depth about these in the next few slides, and then I'll also speak a little bit about how data dissemination also addresses some of these power dynamics, and how the data we prioritize is also related to community empowerment. So I know, Elena, you already just talked for a little while, but I think you're up next again.
Okay, thanks, Mina. Okay, next slide, please. All right, in front of you is the mission and vision for the Essentials for Childhood Initiative, and I mentioned it's funded by the CDC. The work of the initiative is essentially to bring a public health perspective to addressing social determinants of health, to reduce and prevent child maltreatment and ACEs. The emphasis is on creating social norm change and strengthening economic support for children and families. And it is a coalition that's comprised of almost 90 organizations at this point, from folks from state and local governments, nonprofits, and philanthropic organizations. We have about 130 members, and it's really a gift to get to work with all of these amazing folks. Next slide. So we've been talking a lot about how it's important to shift the power dynamics and in the work that we undertake. And so we have a unique model that we're using, or not a unique model, but we're using the collective impact model. And we are unique in that our goal is to try to ensure that folks are guiding and informing the efforts of the initiative all along the way. So that means that they identify what the gaps are, what the solutions are, and then support the staff to carry out the strategies as they see them. And so this model is just sharing from it's called the engagement pyramid from the Commons Library. And it basically, this is very similar to the Hart's ladder of youth engagement, except that this is adult engagement. And so the very bottom of our pyramid is when folks are observing or just following along, or they're maybe affirming decisions. Our goal is to stay in this upper top of the pyramid where our members are contributing to the work, they feel a sense of ownership, and that they are ultimately the leaders. Next slide. So this shows you a depiction of that model. The Department of Public Health and the Department of Social Services serve as backbone agencies to this work. You know, we ensure that the efforts of this group are, you know, in line with the mission and vision of our departments, and also, of course, our CDC notice of funding opportunity as well. But we are not connected to the organizational chart. So the coalition is the group that thinks of the ideas and tells what they need. There are 4 subcommittees. However, the equity subcommittee is between the coalition and the other 3 subcommittees that you see, because they are the touch point for every effort that happens and occurs through this work. So they are informed and inform every piece that comes out or every effort that we take on. And then finally, there's 3 additional subcommittees that are focusing on trauma-informed practices, data, and policy and strengthening economic support. Next slide. So I mentioned briefly that we utilize this collective impact work model to get our work done. Our goal is to support our partners to work towards the same goal and measure the same thing. We're looking for cross-sector alignment wherever possible, and that we're coordinating our action and scaling our lessons learned, and that we're always seeking to achieve positive and consistent progress at scale. Because this image shows that as an isolated group, it's much harder for us to coalesce around an idea and be impactful. But when we're in alignment, we achieve a greater impact. And I think now I'm going to turn it back over to Enrica. Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. I'm just going to touch on this really quickly. It's related to our RPE advisory group. You know, historically, we've had a group to inform, you know, our program and funding priorities. But, you know, I would admit that, you know, it was probably driven by the needs of the current grantees. So last year we had an opportunity to regroup. We wanted to make sure we were including other state and local partners, representing community voices, and make sure that, you know, we're listening to other leaders in the field. So for us, this requires a bit of a shifting of power dynamics and decision making. And so we're just learning more as we go. We don't have this big coalition that Elena has. The purpose is a little bit different, but it's a way to shift some of those power dynamics. Next slide. And then I just want to highlight that we do have a state level collaborative for domestic violence, sexual violence, teen dating violence. But, you know, Elena also participates in that, and we have other representation from violence prevention programs. It's really for 2 government agencies, California Office of Emergency Services, who receives the funding for victim services, and the two state coalitions, Valor US and also the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, for us just to align and act strategically related to prevention. Okay, next slide. That's you, Mina.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly just highlight this effort because I think it's a good sign because it shows sort of the commitment at CDPH to sort of addressing some of these framework elements. We at CDPH, the organizational structure that kind of oversees our branch is called the Center for Healthy Communities. And I want to highlight this example because it's one that I think shows that their commitment to highlight equity and lift up equity within our center. So this is so they identified 3 areas that they wanted to pursue and formed work groups on these, which are building community wealth, improving data equity, and expanding the public health infrastructure, workforce, and leadership. So this is an ongoing process. It's pretty new, where they have identified these areas within their own strategic planning process. So hopefully these work groups come up with some ideas on how we can address these areas. But their intent in these work groups is really to address equity, involve community in the process, and achieve healthier and more resilient communities throughout California. So more to come on this, but I think this is a really great sign that shows the sustainability going forward within our branch and our center. Next slide, please. And then this lastly, I know it's not a really great way to fit this into the larger conversation because it's sort of the data always comes last, I think sometimes, but this is a framework element that I think addresses the infrastructure, the shared values and analysis, and the capacity elements of those 6 pillars that we talked about earlier. And it's really about how we prioritize our data to inform our prevention programs. We have a data dashboard in the works that will include data that informs these upstream prevention approaches. So we want this to feature not just data on the prevalence of health conditions and violence, but that really gets at the shared risk of protective factors, at community level indicators, things like housing security, data on social determinants of health. And we really feel like this gets to the de-siloing that we spoke about earlier. We want this data to inform communities so that they're able to have this shared analysis on what's going on in their communities. So based on this shared data, I really want this to lay the groundwork for shared values. More to come on this dashboard. It's still in the planning stages too, but we hope it really informs our work going forward. Next slide, please. Oh, and I guess that's it. So we want to thank you. I think there's some time for Q&A. Here's our contact info as well. If you would like to contact us, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
All right, thank you, Mina, Enrique, and Elena. It was super valuable for us to get to hear those examples from you all. And I think we can actually see on the next slide, if folks want to share some questions or comments in the chat, we totally welcome that. I just want to say that as a member of the audience for the last half hour there, I'm just really grateful to get that statewide perspective. It's clear, and it's so I'm blown away at how impressively informed your work is by local priorities, community leadership. And Mina, I think you talked about data coming at the end, but for me, it's just clear that it's always top of mind for you all, and you're thinking about data in creative and power-informed ways, data being local stories, data being lived experience, and the value of honoring the wisdom of local communities. So I'm really grateful for you all sharing, and I hope our audience found your presentation as insightful and inspiring as I did. So again, just encouraging folks to share questions in the chat, and we can wait a couple more minutes for questions to come in. And maybe in the meantime, I'll just wait for those questions and turn it back to you all to maybe answer one or two of the questions that I have up here on the screen, just to give folks a little bit more of an idea of advice and skills that they can bring into the breakout groups that we'll go into in a couple minutes here. So Enrica, Elena, and Mina, inviting you to unmute and just share a reaction or quick thoughts on any of these questions.
Sure. Well, the first question about advice for other public agencies who haven't typically located themselves within a power. Obviously, we're a large department, a government bureaucracy. So we need to understand what our limitations are as well, and to be aware of that and what we can support, what we can't support through other partners. But that's the beauty of being involved in collaboratives and coalitions and whatnot, because there's other organizations or players in the ecosystem that can do that advocacy for policy legislature that we could not. So we see our role obviously as, giving the data, the resources, the education, the tools and whatnot. So just understanding your limitations as well.
Thank you for that. Elena, I see you unmuting.
Oh, I was just going to say I didn't have anything to add. I thought that was a wonderful answer.
You too.
Yeah.
Well, Mina or Elena, any thoughts on maybe some of the choice points that you've been encountering as you're navigating power dynamics or making small decisions that really support you live into the values and grow into more kind of culture and systematic approach to addressing power dynamics?
Sure. So I can just speak for the Essentials Project and the All Children Thrive Project and say that, that we really, the efforts to emphasize and lean into the collective impact model has really served us in our ability to be thinking through power dynamics in particular. We staff our members and really are thinking thoughtfully about the definition of what it means to staff our stakeholders to carry out the work. Also another piece that has been very key has been that we have selected the All Children Thrive project themselves, is undertaken through community partners, public health advocates, and UCLA. And they are the ones that select the funded projects at the local level who are carrying out the work to ensure that we're not just selecting common players to undertake the efforts that are, looking at preventing and reducing violence in California's communities. And that has made all of the difference. And they are very, very supportive of the applications of those local personally. In fact, the funding opportunities are not competitive. It's more about being ready, willing, and able and serving a community that is otherwise underserved. And then finally, the other piece has been about supporting the selection of evaluation measures that make sense for the communities themselves. So sometimes, what we would think, at the state level is being helpful and useful and explaining outcomes has not necessarily been true for the locals themselves. So I just really appreciated the opportunity from learning from our All Children Thrive funded partners on that and the local projects themselves. And then I think that's it for me.
Thank you for that, Elena. And I'm sure you got Mina's gears turning when you started describing evaluation and then kind of community-defined measures of success. So Mina, any thoughts to round out the Q&A here?
Yeah, I would just echo what Elena said, and I feel like it almost don't need to really say it because I feel like it's a lot of it seems like really common sense of like you build in the community input before you start your program, or before you just, overlay an evaluation and start collecting data from them. It really has to be what's feasible for that community, and that needs to be known before any work even starts. So, it seems like it's a little bit common sense, but I feel like we say it and hope it happens. And which I know, like I keep saying, it is easier said than done. We keep saying, we're talking today about all these things that we've done or try to do, attempt to, or our best practices, but in practice with this a huge government organization sort of that we're within, it can be really challenging. We know that there's administrative hurdles. There's, and I'd love to hear about from other people maybe on this webinar too, like if they run into these same hurdles that we do and how they overcome those barriers.
Yeah, actually, and I'm wondering too, we were planning on going into breakouts, but we could also pivot, because I think that would be a great question to pose, mine, if you kind of want to hear some responses from folks. We could put the question in the chat too, or see if anyone maybe raises your hand. I think we can help unmute you. But let's see. Yes, we can unmute folks. Oh, cool. All right, so seeing a couple. Thanks for putting that, Elena. And I can advance us to the questions we had for the breakouts as well. So I'll wait to see if anyone has a response to the questions you're posing. And if not, maybe we can just spend like 10 minutes in breakouts for a little bit more sharing between our audience on sort of what works, what resonates, and just how power dynamics are being navigated within your ecosystems. So maybe we'll go in that direction, just because I'm not seeing any responses, although maybe I can pause for a second too to see if anyone does want to respond to this question in the chat here. Okay. Well, we can maybe go into our breakouts. The idea here was to spend just a few minutes with a couple other folks from our learning community. And so hoping that you're connecting across the country, across jurisdictions, maybe across populations of focus, to get some kind of idea sharing for an informal conversation, and wanting folks to just share your experiences and expertise. And then we can come back and close out all together. And so Zach dropped the questions in the chat, and we really encourage you to use the time however it's useful for you. So we can open up our breakouts, and we'll come back, and I think we're going to go for 9 minutes in the breakout and 1 minute closing out. So I'll look to Janae. Are we good to head in that direction, Janae?
Yes, I believe so. We can launch. Go ahead, Ashley.
Yes, yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I am launching the breakout room. So just give me one moment.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Hey, Zach, do you think I should close the rooms in a minute?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And then we can just do a wrap up.
Perfect.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I had the pleasure of going into a breakout group and having a very lively discussion. There are already some existing connections between folks in the room, so glad to have sparked some old relationships and creative ideas coming out. So I hope your breakouts were successful as well. We had maybe one more closeout slide. I'm not sure we have time to harvest, but if you want to share anything in the chat about what came up or any closing thoughts, we welcome that. And we just wanted to share a couple slides that had resources on them. Oh, it's coming, maybe. All good. Cool. Oh, I think it went to a, so we're seeing a web page right now instead of the slide deck. Awesome. Thanks, Janae. So these are just some of the tools and resources that we were able to cover with you all. And there's more on the next slide as well. Each of these links you can click on when we send out the slides. And really lastly, we just wanted to say thank you. And on our last slide, share contact information to stay in touch with Prevent Connect, Prevention Institute, and our guest presenters from California Department of Public Health, who we want to just give the biggest thank you to. So grateful for the three of you coming together with different perspectives, different experiences, different stories and ideas. And so I know I learned so much, and grateful for the participation from our audience, and hopeful that we get to see you on a future Prevent Connect session. So thank you to everyone, and I'll pass it to our friends at Valley US to say a final goodbye as well.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We'll have the recording of this up within a day or so to share with folks who weren't able to join us, and just appreciate all of our presenters and Prevention Institute and you all for joining, and of course our captioners. So take care, everyone. We will see you soon, and this will conclude our session today.